The Crucible Curse is real. I promise you, it is a real thing. And before the doubters come at me with, there's no such thing as a curse, then let me explain to you why it is a real thing. 20 and counting first-time world champions have fallen to it. Steve Davis, Stephen Hendry, Ronnie O'Sullivan, John Higgins. In my mind, the 4 best players to ever hold a Q, and all 4 have fallen to this legendary curse. So what is it? Why is it real? And why does it happen? If you like snooker, and you like breakdowns like these, please like and subscribe. The World Snooker Championship moved to the iconic Crucible Theatre in 1977. The previous year, the tournament had been held in 2 venues, one in Manchester and one in Middlesbrough. The eventual champion of the 1976 edition, Ray Reardon, had complained about the substandard conditions, and Australian pro Eddie Charlton had called the conditions extremely poor. As a result, the tournament moved to the Crucible and has been held there ever since. Despite the massive improvement of conditions as a consequence of moving to the arena, a huge curse over newly crowned world champions was born. No first-time winner of the World Snooker Championship at the Crucible has ever successfully defended their title. Not one. Cliff Thorburn was the first champ to fall to the curse back in 81. Karen Wilson in 25 is the latest. You may not believe that the Crucible Theatre holds supernatural powers, even if some do, but why does this happen? Why is the Crucible Curse a real thing? When I say the phrase real thing, I hope you realise I don't mean it literally, but I do mean that there are a plethora of reasons to explain why the phenomenon occurs. There's obviously a different level of pressure on a player who is newly crowned world champion, and coming into the World Championship as a defending champion for the first time must be burdensome. Steve Davis losing 10-1 to Tony Knowles in 1982 was the first real eyebrow raiser. Stephen Hendry in 1991 was widely expected to be the one to smash the curse, but he lost 13-11 to Steve James in the quarterfinals. John Higgins and Ronnie O'Sullivan both gave solid defences of their maiden title wins by both reaching the semi-finals. They lost to Mark Williams and Stephen Hendry, respectively, however. If Davis, Hendry, Higgins and O'Sullivan couldn't do it, what chance do any of the others have? Let's dive a little bit deeper and speculate the reasons why the Crucible Curse is the ultimate humbler in snooker. Psychological pressure. The expectation on newly crowned world champions is massive. It is the first time they will ever feel the pressure of walking out in the Crucible Theatre with the status of defending champion, and they become the hunted one. The media will be asking, can you be the one to break the Crucible Curse? Which adds extra pressure. You're not just defending a title, you're defending yourself against a 45-year legacy of failure, and that must weigh heavily on the players' minds. Stronger opponent targeting. Nobody ignores the defending champ. You can't go under the radar if you're the reigning world champion. Opponents will be looking to raise their game and claim a scalp right from the last 32, where the seeds play qualifiers have usually already played at least 2 or 3 matches. If you manage to get through the first round and reach the latter stages of the World Championship, you'll likely be facing some of the top players in the world, each of whom will want to knock you off your perch. Loss of momentum. First-time champions often play their peak snooker during their maiden world title win and find it hard to replicate that level 12 months later. For example, John Parrott, the 1991 world champion, is known to have played his absolute best snooker during the final against Jimmy White and struggled to replicate that form during the rest of his career. Another example would be Stuart Bingham, the 2015 world champion. A journeyman pro for most of his career, Basildon's Bingham entered the world's top 16 rankings for the first time in 2011, 16 years after turning professional. By 2015, his level had peaked, with Bingham defeating Shaun Murphy 18-15 in the final to be crowned world champion. Despite still being a top 32 player and consistent performer as of 2025, Bingham has never quite reached the heights of his 2015 triumph. Another factor in the loss of momentum angle is burnout. Karen Wilson, the most recent world champion to fall to the curse, had complained of exhaustion during the 24-25 season and suffered a nosebleed during the quarter-final of the Tour Championship, just 2 weeks before he was due to defend his title in Sheffield. Small sample, big curse. There have been a lot of repeated world champions in the past 48 years at the Crucible. 30 world titles have been won by just 5 players: Steve Davis, Stephen Hendry, John Higgins, Ronnie O'Sullivan and Mark Selby. Therefore, there actually haven't been that many first-time world champions as you'll think. The sample size is small. Pure statistical randomness could easily create a long streak, especially in a tournament as brutal as the World Championship. The cauldron that is the Crucible. First of all, the World Championship lasts 17 days. The defending champion almost always plays on the opening Saturday at 10 AM, meaning that to defend their title they must actually stay the full distance of 17 days. The last first round match begins on Wednesday, meaning that the winner of one of these matches is actually at the tournament for 4 days less than the defending champion, which could make a big difference. The matches themselves are long, with best of 19 frame matches even in the very first round. For reference, at the other Triple Crown events, a best of 19 match is the length of the final. And if the length of the matches weren't difficult enough, you have to play it in an arena that can only be described as a fire pit. The proximity of the crowd to the playing area is very small. The crowd could almost reach out and touch the players if they wished. These factors create a cauldron-like atmosphere that could impact even the most battle-hardened of players. The superstition itself. A lot of players and fans won't admit it outright, but there are certainly many who believe in the curse. Superstitions are common in sport and snooker is no different. The belief itself can shape behaviour. Subconscious doubt or added pressure can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mark Selby admitted in 2015 that he succumbed to the pressure of the Crucible Curse and probably tried too hard. So who was the closest to breaking it? Well, first of all, Joe Johnson. Joe Johnson shocked everybody in 1986 by steamrolling to the world title and beating world number 1 Steve Davis 18-12 in the final. The year later, Johnson gave what I would argue was probably the best ever defence against the Crucible Curse. The Yorkshireman had to fight off both Eugene Hughes and a fresh-faced 18-year-old Stephen Hendry in final frame deciders, before cruising to victory in the semi-finals against Neil Foulds and setting up a box office rematch with the Nugget Steve Davis. Although Johnson led 3-1 early on in the final, the Crucible, and Steve Davis of course, got the better of him as he eventually lost the match 18-14. And then we go to Ken Doherty. Ken Doherty astonished the world by becoming the first person in 6 years to beat Stephen Hendry at the Crucible, defeating the legendary Scotsman 18-12 in the 1997 World Final. A year later, Doherty snuck through the rounds against tough opponents, Lee Walker, Stephen Lee, Matthew Stevens and Mark Williams, before facing another legendary Scotsman, John Higgins, in the 1998 final. Despite competing well early on, Higgins was simply on another level that year. I'd go as far as saying it was probably Higgins' best ever performance at the Crucible, as he made 5 centuries en route to beating Doherty 18-12. We must salute both Johnson and Doherty, because these two really showed that it is possible to fight against the curse. They were just not quite good enough in the end. While the Crucible Curse may not exist in a supernatural sense, it is definitely real in that it is extremely difficult for first-time world champions to defend their title, due to the sheer difficulty of the tournament itself and the cauldron-like nature of the venue. With the Crucible unlikely to remain the home of the World Championship by the end of this decade, I'd bet that the Crucible Curse will never be broken.